Hello, my name is Mitchell Jones, and this is my presentation entitled Happiness and Elevation of the Whole, Utopian Socialism in Upstate New York from 1837 to 1853. This is actually based on my thesis, which focuses on the skinny-idealist community, although this is actually part of a larger project that will be about utopian socialism in all of upstate New York, especially focusing on the Rochester area. Fourierism was the fad ideology of the 1840s in the Yankee states. As you can see on the right, that is the French utopian thinker Charles Fourier. Fourierism was based on his ideas and his plans for an ideal society, what he called a phalanxes, which was basically like a big hotel where everybody worked together towards the common good. On the left there you see the political cartoon, The Hurly-Burly Pot, published in 1850. This is by the artist James Bailey, and he attacks some of the different influences in the country that he sees as dividing the country. On the right you see the newspaper publisher Horace Greeley, who published the New York Daily Tribune, and he was a Fourierist. And Greeley's speech bubble says, "Bubble, bubble, toil and trouble, Fourierism, war and schism, till disunion come." So clearly Fourierism was an influence even into the 1850s. Attempts to build Fourier's society took many forms in the United States. The United States, Fourier's attempted to water down some of Charles Fourier's theories, especially in relation to the cosmos, his ideas that eventually in human evolution humans would have long tails that were useful, his ideas about cuckoldry and bankruptcy that were seen as bizarre to some of the more conservative people in America. But these are three examples of phalanxes that were established in the United States. On the top right, you see the North American phalanx. That was the one that Horace Greeley and Albert Brisbane from Batavia, New York, who was the prophet of Fourierism to America, were involved in. That was near New York City. On the bottom right, you see Brook Farm. That was the phalanx that a lot of transcendentalists were involved in and Unitarians. And then on the left is the Northampton Association, which a lot of Garrisonian abolitionists were involved in. Upstate New York, and especially Western New York and the area around Rochester, became a hotbed of Fourierist activity in the 1840s. And the utopian Christian who started the Oneida community, named John Humphrey Noyes, described the area around Rochester, New York as the volcanic district. This was a takeoff of the term that came to describe the Finneyite movement that was called the burnt over district. Now what you see here are depictions of three communities in the area. The skinny-idealist community, which was closer to Syracuse than Rochester, but then also the Clarkson phalanx, which is very close to Brockport, and the Sodus Bay phalanx, which is in Sodus Bay but came from the Rochester Fourierist movement. Utopian socialism was a reaction to the changes that resulted from the market revolution. And here you see the Erie Canal aqueduct, which went through Rochester. Actually, you see both of the aqueducts. The original one was destroyed because there was a right angle in it that made it very hard for boats to pass through. But the Erie Canal brought access to markets, international markets, to Western New York. And it caused a boom in population in Rochester and the other Western New York areas. This boom in population and the new access to commercial markets caused different societal changes in Western New York. Paul Johnson's book, Shopkeeper's Millennium, deals with these changes. There was a change from manor to wage labor, and actually this change actually helped Charles Finney, the Methodist minister, to build a large following in Western New York. Charles Finney's Second Great Awakening movement led to an explosion of reform ideas about how to meet the challenges of the new market society. But the Panic of 1837, America's first depression, was really the spark that ignited the explosion of utopian socialist activity in the 1840s. The Panic of 1837 was a result of a banking crisis that was orchestrated by the President Andrew Jackson and a number of other elements, but it was really the first depression of the market revolution. And many people started to rethink their loyalty, on one hand, to the Democratic Party, who was known as the Party of the Common Man, and also to rethink the role that capitalism and markets played in society. Ideological responses to the market revolution took three forms in the United States. The first was Finneyism, which we've already talked about, which was, as Paul Johnson argues, a reaction to the change from a master-servant relationship to a boss-employee relationship. Owenism was started by Robert Owen, a Scottish industrialist who had a factory in New Lanark where he pioneered welfare capitalism. But in America, he started the New Harmony community in Indiana. Owenites believed in community of property, or communism, that is, full sharing of all property between everybody in the community. Fourierism did not believe in communism or community of property. Fourierist phalanxes were joint stock corporations. You could invest in them, and it was sort of a combination between capitalism and socialism. As I mentioned, so-called Bible communist and Christian utopian leader of the Oneida community, John Humphrey Noyes, dubbed Western New York the volcanic district, after the Finneyite idea of the burnt-over district of the Second Great Awakening. John Humphrey Noyes connects the Second Great Awakening to the utopian movement, saying that both were approaches to reforming society and bringing society closer to harmony. In the late 1830s, the Fourier Society of the city of Rochester was founded by radicals and reformers in Rochester. Their meeting place was Monroe Hall. Today, it's the location of the Rochester Riverside Convention Center. The Fourier Society of the city of Rochester was founded by T.C. Leland and Benjamin Fish, who were active in the Fourier's movement. Benjamin Fish was a Quaker, a friend of Asa and Huldah Anthony, who were relatives of Susan B. Anthony, and also Amy and Isaac Post, prominent abolitionists and founders of the Rochester Anti-Slavery Society. Fourierists in America believed that in order to test their ideas, they must establish practical experiments in building Fourier's phalanxes. So the Ontario phalanx was a parallel project to the Fourier Society of the city of Rochester. The Fourier Society's goal was more to spread propaganda about Charles Fourier's work. The Ontario phalanx was really set up to build an actual phalanx that would operate based on Fourier's system. The Ontario phalanx published Labor's Wrongs and Labor's Remedy. Actually, many of the authors of Labor's Wrongs and Labor's Remedy went on to form the Clarkson phalanx, which was a rival phalanx to the Sodus Bay phalanx, which also came from the Rochester area. The idea of the Ontario phalanx was to have one large phalanxery for the entire area. However, that did not work out. And the Clarkson phalanx and the Sodus Bay phalanx notoriously split over the location on which they should have their community. And then other associations and phalanxes grew out of the Rochester movement, including the Bloomfield Association, the Ontario Union, the Mixville Association, and the Jefferson County Association. Now, all of these phalanxes and associations ended up joining in a confederacy of phalanxes called the American Industrial Union. It was the first confederacy of Fourierist communes in history. Later, the Massachusetts Fourierists would form their own confederacy around Brook Farm and the other areas. So again, these were the members of the American Industrial Union. You can see some pictures of the Sodus Bay phalanx and the Clarkson phalanx here. Then also the Ontario Union, Bloomfield Association, and the Jefferson County Association. And the AIU set up a central office in the Arcade Building in Rochester, New York, to solicit investments in the various projects throughout the area and have a centralized location. So as I mentioned, the Sodus Bay Phalanx was founded in 1844 by Benjamin Fish. T.C. Leland were two of the leaders. Benjamin Fish ended up becoming one of the main chairpeople of the Phalanx and the board of directors. There was a split between the religious conservatives and the religious liberals. Asa and Huldah Anthony found themselves on the religious liberal side, and they ran into trouble when Asa did farming on the Sabbath, and the religious conservatives opposed that and fought for his ousting. They also later fought for Benjamin Fish's resignation of chair of the board of directors, but he did not end up resigning. Today, the Sodus Bay Phalanx domain is Crackerbox Palace, which is a farm animal sanctuary for animals that can no longer do their duties on the farm, who are injured or hurt in some way, and you can visit it to this day. The main subject of my thesis is the Skaneateles community. Skaneateles community was not a Fourierist community. It was based on the works of this man, John Anderson Collins. And John Anderson Collins went to Massachusetts as a theology student, but soon became an atheist. He became interested in abolitionism and became an agent with the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society and organized about 100 conventions. He visited England and saw that the working class people there were suffering conditions that he considered basically like slavery. And so he determined that the abolition of private property was necessary to abolish all forms of slavery. Collins was influenced by Robert Owen and William Lloyd Garrison, and he was influenced by Owen's communism and no property ideas, and Garrison's non-resistance and no government ideas. However, John Anderson Collins had his own ideas about how things should work and was not beholden to any of these ideologies. Collins and his comrades established the Skaneateles community in Montville, New York, outside of Skaneateles, near Skaneateles Lake, and the community existed from 1843 to 1846. They published the Communitist newspaper there, which disseminated their views, and they considered themselves to be a communitist society. Again, they had no private property, and they taught personal regeneration through education and diet and moral suasion, and the Garrisonian ideas of moral suasion and anti-government anarchist ideas. And that concludes my presentation on Utopian Socialism in Western and Upstate New York in the 1840s. Thank you for listening.